if it's compounded over 10 years? Take a guess. Not a calculator. 500%? Anyone else?
No.
There's no right or wrong.
10,000%.
There's only going to be wrong. I mean, 10,000%.
I think 1,200%.
1,200%. Okay, well, I hope I proved to you in the exercise that it's actually really difficult to do. Here's the right answer. So after 10 years, it's 25%, that's how it grows. So it's extremely difficult to think how that's going to develop. So imagine your company with a whole bunch of different assumptions acting on each other. How on earth are you going to gauge the impact and the result of those assumptions unless you put it down? And in putting those assumptions down and building a model around it, you can quickly see whether it results in ridiculous or unexpected numbers. So the fourth one, I'll go back to the spreadsheet now, the PowerPoint now, while we're here. Because the entire thing is modeled, you can now discover what the driving assumptions are for the success of your business. If you have all your assumptions and your evaluation criteria in one section, what you can quickly do is vary those assumptions to see its impact on the end result. And the exercise that we're going to do here is to quickly see. Okay, so you've got a business. Its current status is that it's doing 20,000 rands worth of sales. Is that better? Okay, so this is your baseline. It's doing 20,000 rands worth of sales. Cost of sales is at 50%. It's got fixed cost. To keep it very simple, which that results in how much profit? 5. Okay. Okay, great. Now the first change we're going to do is we're going to increase the sales by 20%. So it starts in 24. How much profit have we made? 9,000. Okay. So let's have a look. What is the impact on our profit? It's 80% increase in profit. Remember, so 20% increase in sales has led to 80% increase in profit. Now, what if we reduce the cost of sales by 20%? So 50 has gone down to 40. How much money do you think that would? How much profit do you make? So 3. You're just subtracting those two all the time. 3. Okay. So as a result of decreasing your cost of sales by 20%, the impact on your profit, however, is 40%. Okay. And the last one, fixed cost. If you decrease that by 20%, you end up with 6,000, and the increase in your profits is 20%. Interestingly enough, if you affect all those changes, what do you think the increase in profit will be?
10,000.
10,000. So as a percentage, it's 108,000. So it's actually very difficult to figure that out linearly from 80%, 40%, and 20%. Only if you actually build it will you see its actual impact. Now let me ask you a different question, which leads me to my fifth point. The fifth point about cash flow models and its uses is that you can quickly see what the impact on your business is going to be with the various strategies that you have available. So assume each of these changes cost you the same amount. How would you know which one to go after unless you had a model like this to show you that actually spending your time increasing sales is going to be the most profitable? And that's one of the big uses for a cash flow model. So now we get to building your financial model. And again, like I said, I'm not going to focus on the numbers in the right place. It's more the high-level considerations that you have to take into account when building your thing. So the first thing you need to decide is the reason for creating the spreadsheet. The reason why this is important because it impacts the way you look at your assumptions and how accurate you want to be. So if you're going to be making a decision on purchasing a company, you don't want to be ripped off. So you're going to put a lot of due diligence and a lot of time into making sure that spreadsheet is accurate. You're also going to be very conservative with your assumptions because you're assuming that the other guy is boosting his numbers. However, if you've got to build a cash flow model for something like this, you're not going to be spending a full 20 working days on this model. No, it's just a quick and dirty way to figure out, given the amount of resources you're going to get, if you can actually end successfully with the project. The next thing that you have to be aware of is your constraints. And this keeps, one great example is VAT. I keep forgetting to add it in. And that makes a big difference. 14% is a huge number that you're not getting. So the way I define constraints, constraints are that which are imposed on you by your external environment. So things that cannot be changed, things that you have to assume are fact. So in this country, you cannot pay 50 Rand to for 4 days labor. I mean, you can assume that in Vietnam and China, and so therefore you can create your manufacturing process that way, but there is a bare minimum you have to pay in this country. So it's those type of constraints that you have to be aware of. Next thing is to list your assumptions. List your key assumptions and write down what you're assuming about those assumptions. For example, rent. For a tech company, rent is not that important, or rental inflation is not that important. It's a tiny line item in our expenditure. But something for a property company, rental inflation is huge. It has a huge impact on your revenue line. So what makes it a key assumption depends on your business, and that's why you need to know your business well. What are your key assumptions? Lastly, we move over to matching. Matching is a very simple but important concept, and I see it being done wrong many times. So that which you're assuming, is it contingent on something else, or is something else contingent on it? So a great example is, let's say you're coming up with a tech business and your downloads you're assuming are increasing month on month by 25%. But what are the matching expenses to that? Because it doesn't just naturally grow by 25%. What are the associated expenses for that? So an example in our business is, for every user we bring on, we associate a certain revenue line to it, a revenue average amount. But for every user that comes on, we pay at least 40 cents to SMS costs. It's 1.5 times, assuming that the average person takes 1.5 SMSs to register. So those are matched. You can't just assume that your revenue line runs into perpetuity without it being linked to your expenses. So you're not going to have a business that has 10,000 Rand expenses for the rest of its life and then the revenue line growing at 50% month on month. That's just unreasonable. So match your items together. So related to the concept of matching is the fixed versus variable. You need to understand which parts of your cost structure are fixed and which are variable. And for me, the broad definition is fixed costs are that which are going to be incurred whether you make business or not. Okay, so things like your rent, things like your salaries, and so on and so forth. And your variable expenses are those that are directly linked to making money. Second, last, accuracy. Like I mentioned earlier, it depends on your objective. The amount of time you spend building this model will be determined by how accurate you want it to be. I can tell you right now, coming from a BCom background, you can spend forever on a model, tweaking it this way and that way, and it can take up all your time. Whereas you should be rather spending your time on actually getting your product out there or building a product. So you need to be doing, within the cash flow projection, an estimate of how important it is and how much time you want to allocate to it. And lastly, margins. Margins are there to reflect or to help with uncertainty. If the more uncertain you are with a line item, the more margin you put in. And margins can go both ways, remember. So in terms of time, if you are going to experience loss, if something happens quicker, then you make it earlier. If you're going to experience loss, if it happens later, then you make it later. Income, you bring it down if you want to bring in a margin. Expenses, you increase it if you want to bring in a margin. Something that I've done for salaries, for example, is I never knew the additional line items that accompany a salary, but there are quite a few. And so what I did, because I didn't know, I put a fat 10% margin on top of all the salaries that we have to cover for being able to hire someone. So things like COID, which is the compensation for occupational injury and disease, disability. Things like that. There's a whole bunch of them that you've got to pay on top of your gross salary that I wasn't aware of. And you have to have margins in place because at the end of the day, you've got a limited amount of money and you need to see if you can make it within that amount of money. Okay, so once you've built your model, you want to be figuring out the following. Can you make a profit? Is the amount of money that you're earning from delivering the service or product greater than the amount of money it costs you to deliver the product or service? I mean, that's a simple thing. If you buy something at 100 Rand, you sell it at 80 Rand, you're in the wrong business. Get out. You're losing money. A lot of companies have gone under because of they've done just that. Second thing to ask yourself is, can you repeat it? I mean, it's one thing to get a crazy special where you've bought a whole bunch of tires for 10 Rand a tire, but if you can never get that sale again, then you don't really have a business there. You had a once-off sale. Can you repeat the process that you created? Thirdly, is it sufficient to enable you and your employees to live? Remember, at the end of the day, your business should be generating enough revenues so that it pays market-related fees to all its resources. And that includes you. So you can only be living on bread and water for a certain period of time. If it cannot support you by bread and water, you don't have a sustainable business. And lastly, and there is a distinction between sufficient and worthwhile. Remember, you as graduates here have earning potential. Let's take the BAC guy. I think after the third year, when you qualify as the CA, your starting salary is between 25 and 30. Your business needs to provide that salary, plus more, because remember, you're taking effort to start up the business. So if your business is not able to generate that salary for you over time, as well as an additional return based on the amount of effort that you put in initially, then is it actually worthwhile pursuing, given that you have other opportunities available to you? You have to be realistic with yourself. However, there are other markers. I mean, there are other criteria that people take into account. So things like being able to work at your own pace, in your own time, on your own things. People value that and are therefore willing to take a hit in salary. But you need to take that into account. Otherwise, you might as well put your money into the bank and let that earn interest while you're earning a salary. I mean, that might produce you greater returns. So the closing remarks I wanted to make was that, number one, I think something that we touched on before, you guys, I don't know how many of you think that money is your number one problem. I can tell you right now, for 99% of you, it isn't your problem. And when we first started Ask Money for Idea, we were very sharp. We had a degree in all that, me and my co-founder. And we knocked on this business guy's door, and he became a mentor for us for the next 3 years. But when we pitched the idea to him, he was very polite. I'm very glad he was polite, but he was also very cold in some way. He said, no, it's not going to work. And we kept soliciting him for more advice and more money. And you know, the number one thing that I'm thankful for is he never gave us money, because that would have been wasted. The amount of mistakes you make when you start off, learn it as cheaply as possible. Because when you take in money and you give away equity, that equity is gone. It's like marriage, to be honest. Well, marriage can get divorced, but you guys know what I'm saying. Like, you can't get that equity back, and the more improvements you make in your business, the higher valuation you can get. So if you can show improvement in your business without someone else's money, then do that before trying to get money from someone else. Don't waste your money. Also, a lack of money forces you to be creative. Like the crazy things that we did in order to get business deals. Like the one thing, I must tell you this story because it's actually boring and ridiculous. I don't know why we did it. 2010, Financial Times, CNN, Fortune, Time, and CNN had an international conference here. 500 of the big hotshots in the political finance and yada yada space all congregated to Cape Town at the CTICC to hold a conference on what's next for Africa. So my friend and I, we belong to the BYM group, and we got an opportunity to be like helpers for the event. And we were 5 months into our startup, and we were very excited because all these big wigs that are coming, why can't we give them proposals? So we had this very clever idea. We wanted to be handwritten. We wanted to be put in nice envelopes, and we get attention. And what we would do is we would drop it at the security desk. We'd just say that it's for these guys, please make sure they deliver it. Oh goodness, what a mistake. What we didn't realize is the level of security that these guys operate at. When something gets delivered for someone and they have no idea where it comes from, the alarm bells go off and they start looking for its source. And at some point later in the day, a message came over, what's up with these envelopes? Where did they come from? They got escalated to head of security, and I wanted to get out, and I couldn't get out because I had to walk past security. And the conference had lunchtime broke, and I wanted to get out. And I was walking to my doom, to be honest. But fortunately, one of our superiors stepped in and calmed everyone and said, "There's no anthrax, there's no threat here. It's just, we'll sort it out." And thankfully that happened. But you do some crazy things if you don't have money. And I think you learn from that experience. You learn what works and what doesn't work. And there's so, like the young lady, the example that you provide, there's so many ways to get what you need now. Remember, what you need now isn't money. You need to learn what your product you're going to build, who you're going to sell it to, and how you're going to make money from it. And given the internet, and you guys all have internet access, there's so many courses and things that you can do online that will help you with that. Oh, an important thing is don't do it for the money. The reason why I say don't do it for money is if money is your North Star, then very quickly you'll do anything for money. I'm not saying you're going to degrade into prostitution and gambling the next day, but there are many companies who've lost their way because they've made money the ultimate goal. They bribery, mismanagement, fraud, all of that because money was the most important thing. And it doesn't happen overnight. If you're forced with the decision of losing a million rand a year deal, if you do this, this, and that, would you do it? Well, if money was your thing and surviving in that way, then you'll do it. It doesn't really matter. I think it's a very slippery slope you walk on if you do entrepreneurship for monetary purposes. Also, the odds are against you, to be honest. I think the stats are something like 95% of startups don't work. And so if you work out what the expected value of that is for those of you who do stats, you're better off going to a job and making money that way. And I'm serious on that. The amount of effort that you put in this thing. Like I said to myself, if Edge Campus doesn't work, I'm out for a while. I can't do this again. It just drains you not being able to see progress as fast as you. Because you guys know. Just take the difference in speed at which you think about an idea and speak about an idea. Now multiply that by 1 million, and that's the difference between the speed at which you can speak and it actually takes place in real life. And so very few people, and actually I think the stupid people, the ignorant people, will allow themselves to go through that. And be realistic about it, but enjoy it, because you'll learn a lot. It's for a specific type of person. And there's nothing wrong about not doing it. At least you've learned that entrepreneurship is not your thing. And not everyone can do entrepreneurship, because who would the entrepreneurs employ? Let's be honest. We need people to employ. So question and answers. You have questions. We may have answers. So it's question and answer time if anyone has questions and answers. Otherwise.
Follow up with two unrelated questions.
Okay.
As a startup entrepreneur, how much should you pay yourself as a starting out your business? And my other question is, are you familiar with the concept of side entrepreneurship?
Of what?
Of side entrepreneurship.
Side entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Explain to me quickly.
Whereby you keep your job while working on your venture outside your working times.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Okay. First question: how much should you pay yourself? I think as someone, you should pay yourself as much as your company can afford, connected to how much you can live off of. So I was in a very fortunate position where after leaving my job, I had a bit of savings for myself. Once those savings ran out, I was again in another fortunate position where people that I spoke to and who were my mentors decided to fund me personally, not the business, fund me personally. And then once funding got raised, my salary hit an amazing $5,000 a month. So I still needed sponsorship on top of that to live. And then because I'm getting married this year, I use that as an excuse to increase my salary to a livable amount. But because you're the entrepreneur, if you're not going to show that you're willing to invest in this idea, then why should anyone else care? But at the same time, you don't want your entrepreneur worrying about his daily food requirements, because then he's worrying about that instead of the business. So it's a fine line to balance, and there's no right or wrong answer. It really depends on your circumstance. But I think the entrepreneur should lead in the belief of his idea. Side entrepreneurship, I think that's a great way. A lot of people say that if you're bored with your idea, you should jump over, and bored with your job, you should jump into entrepreneurship. I think that's one half of the equation. It's one thing to say you want to move away from something, but unless you've got something pulling you, you're leaving for stupid reasons, because entrepreneurship wreaks havoc on you, your social circle, your family. It just wreaks havoc everywhere. So you better be darn sure that you know what you're jumping into. So side entrepreneurship, if that's the definition, is a great way of figuring out what you're going to be tapping into. I know quite a few guys who do that. Some have like little businesses on the side that are generating, what, 5, 10K a month. Others are trying to pull off bigger things in their spare time. I have no idea how the rest of their life operates, because if you're doing normal